Live from the Talking Joe Studios, it's Talking Joe.
Talking Joe is on the air.
Hey. Well, welcome to Talking Joe. And it's a very special episode of Talking Joe as we are once again talking about Battle Action Force and with some very special guests, creators, Barrie and James Tomlinson. So I will not be talking to those fine gents alone. I will be joined by a multitude of people. First up on the docket is my regular co-host. It's real American Tim Finn.
Ooh. Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners and viewers.
And also talking with us today is someone who does have some connection to Action Force. It is the person who curated and created the fine Treasury editions that Tim has in his hands this very moment. It's Brian Hickey. Welcome back, Brian.
Well, thanks so much for having me back, guys. It's love being on the show and really excited to talk Battle Action Force with you guys and with Barrie and James.
So, very quick preamble. Action Force was launched in the pages of Battle Action Force comic in 1983, just around about the same time that USA was doing its own thing with G.I. Joe. And it ran until 1986 before being relaunched as Action Force Weekly by Marvel. Now, joining us to talk about that amazing era of comics is Barrie Tomlinson, who was the group editor at IPC and a British boys comics legend, and his son, James Tomlinson, aka James Nichols, who was one of the most prolific writers in Action Force in the pages of Battle. He wrote about 30 of the stories in Battle Action Force for the Action Force line, and many more comics beyond that. So you don't want to hear me talking. We want to hear from these guys. So let's add them in. Welcome, Barrie and James.
Greetings.
Hi there.
Hello, Barrie.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Fantastic.
We got one as well.
I have to join the club, so
We can all do that. We can all do that.
just so viewers have a sense, listeners, this might escape you, but imagine a rectangle with my head and shoulders, and I'm holding a big hardcover book, and then I'm holding another big hardcover book, and they're so big and amazing in this 3-pack that you can get from totaltoybooks.com. There isn't room in my camera's view for me to hold all 3 books, and I don't have a third hand. They're big and beautiful.
Yes, indeed. So ties in very nicely with the work that Brian is putting out. And James specifically wrote a very fine introduction to Volume 2. And it's in that book where a good chunk of his work is also featured as well. So I'm sure we'll get on to talk about that before too very long. So before we get too far into this, Barrie and James, where are you coming to us today? Where are you joining us from?
We're joining you from Lower Stondon. This is in Bedfordshire, very close to RAF Henlow.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so it's a bit north of Luton, so it's not too far from Luton. So, yeah, it's a fairly small place, but getting bigger all the time.
And this is this a place that you've lived in for much of your life?
It's about 5 years I've been here. So used to live in St Albans, but now moved here about 5 years ago. And Barrie's joined me here fairly recently. So.
Oh, perfect. So you're together permanently at the moment?
Temporarily at the moment. Yeah.
Temporarily. That's great. So 2 legends of British comics. Where to start? Should we talk with a kind of a brief overview of maybe a sweep of your comics history. I think Barrie, your comics history probably starts a little bit before James. So, what was your, before you started professionally in comics, what was your first interaction with comics?
When I used to read them as a boy, I wasn't particularly interested in a career in comics, but one day I saw an advertisement saying beginners wanted for children's comics. So I applied for the job, and I got a job as a sub-editor on Lion comic. And I stayed on Lion a couple of years. Then I moved to Tiger. And the rest, as I say, is history. Once I got onto Tiger, I was at home, and I eventually became editor of Tiger, then launched Roy the Rovers as a separate title, and then took over Battle, briefly took over 2000 AD, and launched a few more comics down the line.
That's amazing. I mean, and so you were both an editor and a writer, and I think doing those things simultaneously, right?
Yes, and at the same time as well. Yes, I enjoyed writing. I did a lot of writing. One of the big bosses asked me once, why do you use yourself so much? I said, well, my policy is to use the best authors available.
That's perfect. And were you? And I guess were you sort of wearing different hats when you're giving yourself work? That you're editor on probably a salary, and then you're freelancing page rates as a writer.
Yes, I sometimes reject my work, of course.
Was that check or reject?
Reject. So yes, I always made sure that the stories I wrote were popular with the readers. Each time the readers wrote to us, they had to give their 2 favourite stories. So I was able to give a very close check on what was popular and what wasn't. And if one of my stories should not be popular, then I would drop it. But I never experienced that.
That just happened to other people. But yeah, that's a really good point, that it was a mainstay of boys' comics at this point in time, that if people were writing in, they'd be encouraged to sort of fill in these forms listing their favorite stories. So you had a very keen idea on the success of a comic from its sales overall, but also within the comic itself, what was the most popular strips. So which ones to keep, which ones to drop, that kind of thing.
Yes, we could follow it. We could follow it week by week, and if it went down on a particular week, we'd look at that installment and see what happened that week.
And James, during this era, were you an avid reader of comics before entering professionally?
Oh yes, very much so. Yeah, Dad used to bring the free copies back home every day, so I had plenty to read. So I was introduced to comics from a very early stage. So I grew up with them really. So yeah,
they were free comics, but I've sold them to Jones.
And which ones were your favourites from that era?
I was probably more into Battle. I think that was probably my favourite. But all of them, of course, were were very good. So yeah, but Battle in particular.
Because Battle, I guess, sort of placing ourselves in history at that point in time, late 70s, early 80s, the sort of the boys' weekly comic, the war comic, was a real mainstay. That there was the likes of Commando and Valiant and Warlords and Battle Victor. So it was a big thing with probably across the patch, hundreds of thousands of comics in that genre being sold to British school children on a weekly basis. Barrie, are you able to talk a little bit about that industry dynamic of the boys' comic at late 70s, early 80s?
Yes, I was going down a different track, but bringing sport into children's comics. when I took over as editor of Tiger, I changed it from a sport and adventure title to a sports title. And the success of Tiger as a sports title enabled me eventually to launch Roy the Rovers as a separate title.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, growing up, me and my brother, was close in age to me. He loved Roy the Rovers. He was big into sport, but I was big into action and adventure. So Battle was kind of my comic. Roy the Rovers was his comic. And we had them on order at the local newsagent. We used to love going down every week with our pocket money and have our comics with our name, written in the top corner. It's a great memory. But the sports stuff really appeals to him. And we never traded comics. He was very much stayed in his genre, and I stayed in mine.
Yes.
Can I hear a little bit about where comics were sold, and was this? I mean, specifically the kinds of stores and retailers, but also, can you tell us a little bit about distribution? Were these titles only in the UK? Did they get to Europe? If so, how far?
Yes, they got to Europe to some extent, but quite big sales in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and countries in Africa that they took quite a few copies. And we used to get a lot of mail from overseas. It took a while for the copies to get to them, but they're slightly out of date by the time they got to readers abroad, but still had a big following from those countries.
Brian, can you maybe just hold up one of your copies? Because I think the pricing in the top or left-hand corner has got like pricing for...
It might
let
be
me see if I
out of focus if I can... But you can see down here, Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, and Ireland.
And these are all pounds and pence.
So it's Australia 55 cents, New Zealand 52 cents, Malaysia $1.35, and in Ireland 29 pennies, and all including that. So they're
So in the States, in the 70s, comic book stores were developing as a separate distribution channel from newsstands, and everyone in the cities went to the newsstands and bought newspapers and magazines and comic books. And comic books may also be sold at like drugstores or maybe barbershops. Maybe barbershops had sort of old copies that had been sitting around. Where were you buying comics in the UK in the 70s and 80s?
Well, for us, we bought them from our news agent. So the news agent was like a family-owned shop. The family lived upstairs, and they had the shop downstairs. And I'd say that's pretty common for news agents all over Ireland and the UK at that time. They sold newspapers, comics, sweets. There might be a couple of like bread and milk, grocery basics. And occasionally they might have some toys like the Matchbox cars or something like that. But it was primarily where you went to get your newspaper and your comics. That was the main stuff that they sold.
Yeah, and beyond the local newsagents, you'd have the sort of the larger newsagents like W.H. Smith, which would also like stock stationery and that kind of thing. But a lot of the way that we would get our comics at that point in time would be via like a standing order with your local newsagent. They would write your address in the corner of the comic. It would get rolled up and rammed through your letterbox once a week. There we go. Brian's got one with a to Rye written in the corner of the book. So seeing secondhand comics from that era, more often than not, you'll probably see an address scrawled on them.
Yeah.
Barrie, from your perspective, does that all ring true? Is there something that we're missing about like distribution and in terms of how the comics would actually get through stores and into readers' hands?
No, that covers it okay. Of course, what we really wanted was the comic delivered with the morning newspaper. That way Dad would have a read of it as well. the subscription would carry on. Get Dad aboard, that was the secret.
Absolutely, yeah. If once you got the order in, Dad's paying for it along with his newspaper subscription.
Yes,
It's just going to keep on ticking over.
If only it had gone that way at Air House, it would have been great if my dad had been buying the comics instead of me having to shell out. I only got 30 pence pocket money back in the day, and it was 29p, so I had 1 penny left over.
Mark, stop me if I'm jumping ahead, but I wanted to ask Barrie and James about the office, about the publishing office, what it looked like, how many people, who's doing what, and are there freelancers who are not working in the office? So can you paint a picture for us of the IPC rebellion, if I've got it right, office?
Yes, the IPC office was a modern 29-floor high building overlooking the River Thames. My office overlooked the River Thames, so it was one of the best views in London. So it was 29 floors full of staff people. All the freelance people work from home. So each comic only had a very small team of 4 people, an editor, sub-editor, an art editor, and an art assistant. So those 4 people produced the comic. And first of all, I was the editor. Then later I was the group editor, which oversaw those people, how they were working, what they were doing. And it was me, I was the ideas man. And they got on with the day-to-day things in the office. So it was a very small staff, but a very big freelance staff. And I was very lucky as an editor that we had very high quality artists and writers. I was able to call upon a team who were very, very talented. One sitting here.
Oh, thank you.
Didn't the office have quite a grand name? Like, was it something Landing or
King's Reach Tower?
King's Reach Tower, yeah.
All 29 floors are for the company, for deals and sales and subscriptions and art and payroll, right? It's not as if the publishing was only part of the building. The entire building was for the publisher.
It was all used by IPC magazines, who produced practical magazines, women's magazines. They're one of the biggest publishing houses in Europe and very, very successful.
And to some degree, I think some of the comics, because like 2000 AD, Battle, they were sort of launched by young mavericks like Pat Mills and John Wagner. There was a little bit of sort of fighting against the system, because IPC was a big moneyed institution with a lot of more, I guess, corporate types. A lot of people, sort of veterans of the military, had been sort of in commanding roles there and that kind of thing. That there was sometimes a bit of a clash of cultures. Is that fair to say?
There was, yes. I mean, I wasn't involved in the launch of Battle or 2000 AD, so I can only say what I've heard. But yes, the Mavericks, as you call them, were producing new ideas and new types of stories, and it was always a balance with the company, what they would allow to go through. But they did allow lots of stories to go through, and stories like Charlie's War, one of the great classic stories of children's comics.
If not the greatest, yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
And Barrie, I think during the era that we're talking about, with Battle Action Force here being introduced, here's the average weekly sales for the Battle comic since its launch in 1979, where it was upwards of 120,000. It was in a little bit of decline over time, and then with the launch of Action Force in 1983, it sort of peaked again for a little while before it finished in, what was it, 1980? Is it six?
It finished in
yes.
November '86, but obviously that.
Oh, so that was Action Force, and then it continued on for a couple more years with the Storm Force era. During, I think, a lot of that period, you were group editor at IPC. So what did that group editor role involve, and to what degree were you kind of seeing what was going on with Battle and Action Force?
Oh yes, I was always peeking through the door to see what was happening. Though it wasn't until 1979 that Battle became my responsibility. The story of that is that I was editing Tiger and Roy of the Rovers, and the management asked me to do a junior football magazine rather than a comic. And that was called Top Soccer. And I worked on that for about 6 months, got the first issue ready, showed it to the management. They liked it. And one day I was called down to the editorial director and said, look, we're going to make some changes here. We're going to take this new title before it's even launched away from you, and we're going to give it to the Shoot group. So I was rather peeved about that. He said, but don't worry, we're going to give you Battle and 2000 AD to make up for it. How about that? I said, I'm still not happy. He said, I'll create an empire for you. And so I had to take the two new titles and lose the new one, which hadn't even been launched. And by the time it was launched, Top Soccer, it was totally different to what I was going to do. And it didn't last very long, so I was laughing in a corner.
Vindicated.
That's how I got Battle onto my group. It was, circulation was struggling a bit then, so it was a difficult time to take it over. But then, as you say, Action Force coming in boosted it for those few years, which is why we had to try and create something to replace it. And Storm Force came along.
And what level of hands-on involvement did you have with the running of Battle Action Force during those few years? I think you would have had an editor sitting beneath you who was doing most of the hands-on, putting teams together and all of that kind of stuff.
Yes,
right?
Terry McGee was the editor then. So we worked together on story ideas and so on, and fitting Action Force into the comic, which was a great boost for it, as I say, and a great loss for it when we eventually lost it.
Did you have much interaction with Palitoy as the license holder?
I didn't personally, because IPC was such a vast organisation. There was a department for doing everything. So we just stuck to the actual editorial work. We were told when the company signed up, a toy company, to be involved with the comic, then that would be done elsewhere, and it would be presented to me.
I got the impression that with the launch of Action Force, you had almost like a triple win to some degree, because you had this toy and like the toy being advertised and sort of getting readers into the comic via that route, but also I think that Palitoy were paying you for the privilege of creating the strip, so the actual some of the production costs were shouldered by, if that's an expression, by Palitoy, so that actually the production cost of putting the comic it's out was already from a better place or a more profitable place.
Yeah, yes, indeed it was. It was a very good arrangement for both sides, really, and it's something that we later reproduced when we signed to do Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, and that was a massive success. and we based it on what we'd learned dealing with the toy company before. And I was able to take Turtles up to almost 900,000 circulation.
Oh, what? That is crazy. So, Barrie, you were editing Turtles, and I think, James, you were doing some of the writing for Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, quite a lot of that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Was that a fun property to work on?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And you get bring elements of comedy into it and that sort of thing. And it was very good. Yeah. I enjoyed writing that.
I know for sure that you were given a Bible of sorts to work from, with like character descriptions and that kind of things for Turtles. What sort of materials were you given to work with as a writer on Action Force?
Yeah, so it's a similar sort of thing, really. We were given a sort of a Bible about the characters and the various vehicles, aircraft, or whatever. So you have to sort of, stick to those ideas, really. But quite a lot to work from. So yeah, it was good, useful information.
Did you get a care package of any of the toys sent to you at all, or to some of the artists, perhaps?
Yeah, they probably got some. I'm not sure we did. Not like, I think we must have got some. Yeah. I seem to recall now. Yeah. We did get a fair few, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I sold them to you.
Yeah, you probably did. Yeah.
James, can you talk about your format for writing scripts? I think American comics tend to either be full script or plot with dialogue added after the art, and some writers write it a little bit more like screenplays, sort of dialogue heavy. Some writers write a lot of scene description and even backstory. If you were to characterize one of your comic scripts, what does it look like? What are you providing for the artist? How long does it take you to write?
You basically give a scene description for the artist, telling them what I imagine that scene to be, so the artist can work from there, and then what each character was saying will be below that description for the letterer to do. But I try not to be what's the word? Try and blind the artist with too much information. So I'm trying to keep it reasonably short, what you want, rather than sort of big paragraphs of information. So because the artists are very, very good indeed. They know what they're doing, really. So you give them a general idea, and they usually expand it and give their own take on it. So as for how long they would take, it's very difficult one to take. Very difficult one to explain. But sometimes, some can be quite quick, quite easy to do, and others take a bit longer. It all depends what the story's line's like and what's actually the story itself, and so many variables. But
do you remember any particularly challenging deadlines or stories that needed a change?
Sometimes when we were working with one of the toy companies, they'd want changes. You to submit a script, and they'd look at it and say, "No, you can't have that in it." And it would come back to me, and there would be some changes to make. Sometimes it would be quite a lot of changes. Other times, just smaller things, really. So you have to bear that in mind. That's always a possibility. They may want changes. So
we had to take every issue.
Sorry, Barrie.
We had to take every issue to be approved. And in those days, artwork was about twice the size it appears in print. My voice is going, yes, like that, or even bigger. Yeah. So I had to take a package of those every week to the copyright holder for approval. And in the early days, it was very, very difficult to get approval. It took a long, long time until they got to know us and we got to know them. Then it was slightly easier.
For a company like Palatoy, who would have had their base up in Leicester, And you're, and obviously your offices were in London. So for people who maybe aren't that familiar with the geography of the UK, that's a fairly big distance between Leicester and London. Did you?
They had agencies in London.
Okay.
I only ever went in London.
Great. And one of the things that some of the feedback that we've got from, say, American readers who've just picked up the new Treasury editions, they've noted that it's quite violent compared to the G.I. Joe comics that they were reading back in the 1980s. So is that something that did Palatoy give a lot of pushback in relation to the violence, or what was your general sense in terms of the copyright holder, the licensor? What was their reaction to the amount of violence in the comics?
We didn't have any major problems. I think they recognised that we were doing it mainly for a British market to start with, and we had no approval problems that I can recall.
No, I can't recall anything at all to do with violence. No, they seem to let that go, sort of thing. So,
I suppose compared to stories like Charlie's War, which was running concurrently with Action Force, Charlie's War is really grim. And as a kid, I couldn't read the Charlie's War stories. I would skip that. Now, 40 odd years later, it's a masterpiece and I love it. But as a 10, 11, 12-year-old, those 3 or 4 pages would get skipped and I get straight into the Action Force content.
Yes,
I guess
well, yeah.
To Brian's point, I guess culturally that there was this phenomenon of war comics, still not that historically not that far removed from those big conflicts, and some very fresh in the memory, like the Falklands, which Battle specifically kind of addressed in its pages. I guess there's that kind of like a tradition of kind of war violence. I don't know if that's the right word for it, man. And I guess of some of the some of those kind of attitudes of have at it, Hun, and all of those kind of things that you probably wouldn't see in today's comics.
No, when we did the Falkland Island stories, they were much more true to life. There wasn't too much gung-ho in those. We tried to show it as it was. We did 2 Falkland stories. Some people criticised us that it was too soon after the conflict to do them. But we thought it was important that our readership should see what happened. And to make an adventure story out of it without going over the top.
Well, that's one of the things that strikes me when I read the war stories in Battle. It doesn't over glamorize war at all. It actually portrays it as a pretty grim environment or scenario, but where we get to see both a dark side and this kind of light side to humanity. So it's credit to the writing team who worked across all those different strips that were included in Battle. They kept it real, but at the same time making it palatable for a younger audience.
Yes, I think it's a great compliment to the people who launched Battle, that they had that sort of idea behind each story, that it wouldn't go too much over the top and keep it as true to life as possible. And I think it's a great compliment to them, what they achieved.
In a slightly different direction, James, I think some writers in the States who worked on licensed books based on toys felt self-conscious because they were doing something that was aimed at kids or something that was relying on this other product as opposed to a more pure published story that was original. Did you have any sense of good or bad working on Action Force stories that were based on a toy?
It's certainly different, but was it better or worse than other stories? I don't know really, but it was certainly different. You have this Bible of ideas you have to stick to and that sort of thing. But it was different, but it's still enjoyable to do. But you have to bear in mind what you're doing is for this toy company, and they may look into this and say. So I might think to myself, "Oh, can I put this in?" Or will the toy company come back to me and say they don't like this bit, they don't like that. They would rather you stick to this idea. So yeah, you have to be a bit more careful with what you were doing, certainly, than some other stories, I think.
Did you ever introduce yourself to a young person and say, "Oh, I've written some Action Force stories," and then gotten a reaction from a young person at the time?
Not really, no. So in the last few years where I'm working now, I work with a lot of other people, and I mentioned I've written things in the past. It's the Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. They say, "Oh, you wrote that." Oh, yeah. They really go for that rather than sort of the Action Force sort of thing. So, yeah, that's interesting. But I can't recall speaking to anyone at the time, younger people at the time. But,
We probably didn't have like a convention circuit back then the way we do now. So
no.
I'm guessing that there mightn't have been many opportunities to meet the readers back in the 1980s.
Yes, so we used to visit schools regularly and chat to them what they liked and what they didn't like. And that was always very popular with the young people, that they got a visit to their schools. And at one time I started to organise sort of mini conventions where the readers could come along and meet the artists and meet the writers. And again, that proved to be very popular, and it was a breakthrough because it hadn't been done before.
Barrie, when you mentioned going to schools, are you talking about a kind of market research, or is this more like a career day where a writer or an editor would talk to kids about jobs that they might have?
No, it'd be totally about the comics. It was an opportunity for us to find out what was popular and what wasn't, and the chance for them to say if there was something they particularly disliked in the comic, they could tell us about it. And we had very good, frank exchanges, and it was very useful.
Now, James, when you started at Battle Action Force, you were quite a young chap yourself. I think you were 19 when you started writing. Can you tell us about how you got into comics and what that was like? Sort of, I guess, writing at what I would describe as quite a young age professionally.
Yeah, sure. When I left school, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do at all. So I did a sort of some temporary work in warehouses and that sort of thing for several months anyway, while I considered what I was going to do. And then, because I've been brought up in a comic atmosphere, really, with access to comics, and I've always been quite good at writing, even at school. So I tried a few sort of, Dad suggested, I think I did a few sample scripts and see where we went from there, and they were accepted with probably quite a few changes. So then I started to do more scripts on a more regular basis. I think Action Force, when I was just starting, Action Force was just starting then, so that was quite good timing. So I could go straight into that because they were obviously looking for writers for Action Force. So that's the way it started, really.
Did you get to work on the just prior to Action Force in 1982? There was IPC released The New Eagle. Did you work on any of the stories in that prior to joining Action Force?
It was me that launched the Eagle, so he had a good contact.
Yeah. Certainly, yeah. I think
that's me on the front cover there, bottom right.
The monster on the top, right?
Not top left.
No, bottom right, not top left.
Okay, that's wow.
Can I
Wow.
can I just for our American listeners, can someone give me a one sentence description of what Eagle is? It's a weekly magazine, and what's the focus?
Will I go for that or attempt it? Or Barry, do you want to do it?
Yes, it's a boys' adventure comic, which was first printed in 1950 until 1969. And I was a reader of that original Eagle. And it was always my ambition to bring back Eagle. It took me a long time to persuade the management to let me do it. But finally they did, and I brought Eagle Mark II out.
And if we're this cover we're looking at has some photographic elements of real people, and then a bunch of titles and characters that are going to appear inside. But it's all comics. It's not. There's no prose. There are no photo essays. It's all comics.
No, some are drawn stories and some are photo stories. We introduced photo stories into boys' comics for the first time to see what the reaction would be. And the readership didn't like them. We thought it was the nearest thing we could get to television. But no, they didn't like it. They liked stories to be drawn. And it was easier for us because it's the days before computers. So any special effects had to be done by hand. So it was quite a relief when we went back to drawn stories. And the artists were very pleased as well.
Well, I have to say, I was a reader of the New Eagle, and I just want to say that there was some stories in there scared the hell out of me. And Doom Lord was one of them.
Yes, Doom Lord, yes. Yes, they were quite strong, the stories. The readers of the original Eagle thought it would be like it was before, but it wasn't quite as tame as that. It was a little bit more adventurous, shall we say.
I mean, my recollection of it is that there was a great mix of, you had sports stories, you got Thunderbolt and Smokey, you had science fiction with Dan Dare, and you had like the Tower King, which is another kind of, in the near future post-apocalyptic Earth. That was a fairly creepy story. And then you had things like, Mannix and Sergeant Streetwise, which were probably more like your TV shows that we would have seen a lot at the time. The Glenn A. Larson production TV shows. So it was a really great mix of stories in that and on different genres. So I was a big fan of that, and I migrated from that to Battle then in 1983.
Right.
Yep.
Well, both mine, so that's okay.
Can I ask about, Mark, can you just put that previous image back on the screen for a moment? So this cover we're looking at on the top, it says Golden Eagle Badge, free this week. And on the bottom left, there's a red square and it says free gift, wear it with pride. And I think something's been removed. And I'm aware of this from some of the Marvel UK magazines like Transformers. Can maybe all four of you, but Barrie, maybe particularly you, if you were in the office for longer, can you talk about the contests and the premiums and the gifts? Because there were a lot of these.
Yes, when I first took over as editor of the comics, there was a special department, of course, being IPC had a special department which dealt with free gifts. And it meant that we all got the same sort of gift, a plastic flyer or something like that. And I fought for a long time to allow the editor to choose what sort of gift it should be. And eventually got my own way. And each comic then produced free gifts, which were very much tailored for that particular comic. We had no more mass-produced gifts.
And across specifically like Battle Action Force, there were a sporadic number of gifts. There were like, posters in the middle, which were a little bit easier because that was, just a printed material to come out. But there was the occasional stickers on the front cover. There was some 3D glasses to coincide with these 3D pages that appeared in a few of the issues. Most of them were stickers, weren't they, Brian? I'm trying to struggle to think of
Well, actually, there was a lot of.
Oh, there was a free toy, actually, wasn't there, with the launch of Action Force as well? You could get a free, 5 point of articulation.
Well, actually, some of the freebies included, as you said, there was an action figure, an Action Force action figure. It came with Battle, Eagle, and Tiger as part of kind of a promo, but also included in all three of those titles was another freebie, which was a mini comic that was included, and we got, I think, 5 of these in total, and that's just how it compares size-wise with the,
So mini comics, that action figure, were those issues then bagged in plastic, or were something stuck in the middle like a poster? How did you get the figure? How did you get a copy where someone hadn't grabbed the figure?
It would have come in a clear cellophane or plastic, baggy, for want of a better term. If there was no free gift, sometimes they were just sellotaped on. But I don't have an example here, but they might have just been glued on or taped on. But if there was
often just in the middle of the comic, stapled as part of the stapling process, they might include the stickers or the mini comic there, I think.
Yeah.
So James, we were talking about your start on Battle Action Force, and we published under, I think, 2 pen names, mostly as James Nicholas, but also as a P. Rudge at some point.
Oh, right. I don't.
You might not remember that one.
I don't remember P. Rudge. No, I'll take your word for P. Rudge, but certainly James Nicholas. Yeah, I wrote under that name. Yeah. But,
Who is this person?
who is P. Rudge? Rudge?
No, I never heard of him.
No.
That's intel from the amazing Blazing Battle book, where it credits. I think there was like 1 or 2 stories written by P. Rudge, and they say that was a pen name of yours, but I'm guessing that is the use of James Nicholas is to just avoid the connection to Barrie and accusations of
too many Tomlinsons possibly. Yeah, so
spoiling the broth.
Yeah, that's right. I think so. Yeah, it seemed to work out all right. So yeah, fine.
Barrie and James, can you talk about writing and editing stories of particular length? What were your expectations of sort of what readers wanted or what the writers wanted in terms of short stories, ongoing stories that were longer serials, multi-parters? What was the goal? What were your expectations?
Well, most of the stories were serials, but I always liked to have one complete story in each issue, just to entertain the reader for that week. But it was important to have lots of serials so that they'd want to buy the following week to see what happened next.
And
so did I.
And that serialized nature meant that within the anthology weekly, you had stories as short as about 3 pages. I think Charlie's War was mostly 3 pages at a time, and about as long as 8.
I think there was some Action Force stories, and that there was, I think, was 6 pages. So that 6 pages was a long story. Some of them were 4 pages, and some were 3 pages. So the length did vary between 3 to 6 pages. And in fact, I'm just looking through some of the stories here in this one. It looks like Johnny Red's got 3 pages. Charlie's War has 3 pages, but Action Force has got the center spread plus 2 other pages after that, so 4 pages in total. So it varied,
And how did you guys?
Most artists can only do about 3 pages a week.
And yeah, if you're the likes of Ian Kennedy being asked to do 3 painted pages a week potentially, and that's very few people can kind of keep up with that level of quality and output as well on a weekly basis.
Just to differentiate this from the norm in American comics, where there tended to be a pencil artist and an ink artist. British artists were penciling and inking themselves their own work. They were not collaborating, right?
Yes, and coloring as well if necessary.
Okay. And Barrie, your freelancers, did they all live within tube, within subway distance? Were they all walking their artwork in? Did some of them live far away and mail in their art?
Yeah, I mean, Ian Kennedy was in Scotland, for example.
Okay.
Joe Calhoun was down on the south coast. Most of them were outside London. I think there was only probably about one who lived in London. There were some agencies who represented artists who brought work in that had been delivered to them by the artists. So it was fairly rare to see an artist come into the offices.
Can you talk about recruiting new artists, finding new artists to draw your books?
It was very easy, really, because our reputation in the publishing industry was very good. So we had artists coming to see us or sending us work. So there was never a shortage, and they were always very, very high quality.
I was going to say that there was a contingent of Spanish-speaking artists as well, who I think were sort of contracted via reps generally that also worked. And the main example of that in the battle space is probably a big example of that in the battle space is Vanyo, who was one of the. Well, I say one of, but it was a pair of brothers, right? They would sort of share the pencils and inks between them.
That's right. Yes.
And they did an awful lot of the Action Force, but also then the Storm Force as well when that was launched. I think, going by a post from you, Barrie, that Vanyo did a lot of the designs based on descriptions of characters that you gave to him for those Storm Force characters. And so before you answer that, for a little context, Storm Force was the replacement strip that went into the pages of Battle when the license was given to Marvel and the Action Force strip was lost from the pages of Battle.
Yes, just going back to there were two big agencies that dealt with foreign artists. There was one which dealt with Italian artists and South Americans, and another one which dealt with Spanish artists. So we used those two agencies a lot because they had some good artists.
Mm.
And Vanyo brothers were one of those artists, and it's an artist I use a lot because I like working with them. I like doing scripts for them.
Did you ever get the chance to have much personal interaction with them, or was it generally via that agency?
It was either via the agency or IPC. Being IPC, there was a department which dealt with these artists. So I never got to see the overseas artists. This is always done by the head of that particular department. So I never met the Vanyo brothers, even though I did hundreds and hundreds of scripts for them.
Barrie and James, over time, the offices must have changed as older employees retired and younger people came in, but also as computers and newer technology came in. Can you talk about some of the changes that you remember happening?
I can remember moving from the 5-story block in Farringdon Street in London to the new 29-floor office block at Kingsreach Tower, and then leaving there after many years and going to a very, very small, crampy office in a side street in London. That's how things were changing.
Wow.
But computers, they weren't really coming in my time.
When you say things were changing as you moved from the big office to a small one, is that to say that the market was shrinking or sales were lowering, or was there something else happening?
No, the market was lowering, and it was a difficult time for comics. it's a time when I set up my own company and took the titles with me, with the agreement of the publishers, of course. Took the titles with me, set up creative editorial services, and took the editors with me, some of their staff, and we all worked freelance. And suddenly it was saving a lot of money for the publishing house because we were producing it all from home. And that worked quite nicely for about 18 months until there was a change of publisher. And the new publisher came in and said, we don't want people working at home, we want people working here. So suddenly all the titles I'd worked on were taken away from me.
Oh.
James, can you talk about changes that you saw in your time working at IPC?
I was freelance. I worked from home the entire time, really, when I was writing these stories. So I wouldn't have seen so many changes as Barrie did, because, I was at home. But obviously, when I was first started writing scripts, I was just an old-fashioned typewriter I was using. And then after that, a year or two after that, I started writing my scripts on computers and that sort of thing. But in those days when you had to use old-fashioned typewriting, you make a mistake and use the old Tipex and whiten it all out and that sort of thing. It was very, very primitive in those days when I first started writing, for sure.
But I guess the types of work that you were being offered, or the volume of work that you were being offered from comics, changed, I guess, relatively significantly since your start in the early 80s.
Yeah. Titles came and went, stories came and went. So it's Battle Action Force, Battle Storm Force, and then moved into Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles and Toxic Crusaders and various other titles. So it always seemed to be something new around the corner, so to take over. So that was interesting. Different subjects as well. War stories, action stories, sports stories. So different genres. So
if we were to look at like the British newsagent of 2025, that the shelves do look very different to how they were back when we were picking up Battle Action Force, week of release. It's very much a different looking and shrunken market. That we've still got 2000 AD out there, probably not quite selling at the levels that it once did, but there's beyond that. A lot of the market is these plastic bags with a toy and a supplementary magazine, and much less room for kind of the exciting and innovative comic content that we once had, unfortunately.
What is nice is how well people remember the comics. I've got an account on what was Twitter, is now X, and I've got about 7,000 people who follow me. Most of those are former readers, and it's amazing that after all these years we can still talk about the contents of the comics, and they remember the contents better than me. And we have very good chats about them, and it's lovely to know that the comics are so well remembered after all these years.
But they brought joy into the lives of so many kids, boys and girls, in that 70s and 1980s kind of time period, and they really were like an amazing part of our childhood growing up, and it was, so it's not a surprise that it's still fondly remembered today.
Yes, they do say that the comics meant a great deal to them, much more I think than we realised.
Yeah, for sure.
And of high enough standard that the likes of Brian are putting out lovely Treasury collected editions of this almost 40-year-old material, and also Scream and many of the other titles from that era that you were involved in, that it as well as those nostalgic memories of how good we felt it was at the time. Looking back, a lot of it is great, sort of, and as well as the people who read it at the time, new people can discover it through those reprints.
It's good that the work isn't dated and people still want to read it.
I had a couple of questions about, probably this is more for James, about creating the stories. So Action Force, it was started, as a Palatoy brand, and a lot of the work you're doing initially was like, trying to have a 3 3/4 inch 5-point of articulation toy that didn't have a huge amount of context, to it beyond the fact that it was a toy released on a bubble, and then creating exciting stories, out of whole cloth to kind of bring these characters to life, and then that shifted from that Palatoy era of those kind of Palatoy UK originated stories to based on these. Here we go. Based on these fellows, all of these plastic guys, to more of a G.I. Joe Cobra kind of era where like the likes of Destro and Zartan and Cobra Commander were introduced to tie into the launch of those toys. So it was quite a big change to the storytelling. But as a writer, did you have much visibility of G.I. Joe and what was going on with those same characters over in the States?
Not really, no. But once again, they just surprised us with a Bible about the G.I. Joe things, and we just worked from there. I wasn't really, I say, aware of it before it suddenly appeared and say, you've got to do this now. This is the new thing. But we just continued working on it, really. It was a big change, obviously. It takes some getting used to. You're writing stories about certain characters, and the next moment they've all gone, and some new characters are there. So it's, it was interesting.
Just well, in Jerry Finley Day's introduction, which he wrote for Volume 1 of the Treasury editions, he mentions that there was, in the mid '80s, that there was a big kind of lunch in the IPC canteen. And Barry, I don't know if you remember this, but he talks about the toy makers coming over. It was a great chance for Jerry to meet not only the toy makers, but to meet some of the artists who worked, on his scripts and stuff. Have you any recollection of that? Kind of that event, from that period?
Oh, I haven't.
I haven't. I don't recall going. But
perhaps they didn't invite us.
Yeah, it won't do.
And speaking of some of the other writers involved on Battle Action Force, there were a number of different artists, some writers, some wrote more stories than others. How was that process about sort of allocating out a writer to a story? Was it a case of like the editor going, I've got 5 pages I need to fill, I'm going to ask this particular writer, or is it more of a case of I've got an idea for a story, can I run with it? What sort of push-pull dynamic was it?
Well, I'd meet with the writers fairly regularly, and we'd talk about what they were writing at that moment, or any ideas they'd got for the future, or any ideas that I'd got. And we'd swap ideas, we'd have a yarn about things, we'd have a very nice leisurely lunch, and then we'd come back and we'd have a plan. Leisurely lunches always work very well.
That's how you would be able to, keep some sort of, continuity between the stories, and you didn't have writers kind of doubling up on kind of using, say, the same character in 2 different stories or locations that were running sort of parallel in the comic.
No, I'd make sure that they were all going in different directions. Excuse me.
So this is.
We didn't get clashes because I was the centerpiece of the thing, so I could always decide which writers were going into which areas.
And I guess the writers that impressed you the most, they might get first first pickings, maybe.
If they were writing popular stories, yes. It's always my plan to use the very best writers, and we did.
And I had another question more about the dynamics of the UK market at that time, because you would typically have the weekly comic, and then alongside it you might have like a holiday special coming out a couple of times a year, and then you'd also have the tradition of the annual, which would be like a kind of a pre-Christmas book that I guess was aimed at the kind of parents to buy for their kids to go into their stockings. How important were those different sort of comic events for a book like Battle?
They were very important. It gave us a chance to try out new contributors, because the regular weekly contributors mostly couldn't do extra annual work. So it was a chance to find new people, perhaps some youngsters coming in, and encourage them and use them in the annuals and specials without any obvious lack of quality.
The annuals are hardcover. They're hardcover books. Were these sold at the same newsagents as the weekly issues of the magazines were, or were these more like bookstore items?
Everywhere, really. They were in some of the big supermarkets, some of the big bookshops, as well as the newsagents as well. So I think a lot of people tended to go back to the newsagent because that's where their loyalty was.
There would often, I think, be a big display in like a place like WH Smith or Woolworths or something like that, where you might have that year's annuals sort of all piled up high, sort of to attract the eye of the parents who might be looking to buy a Christmas present. I think that felt like it was the target audience.
Yes, we always did the annuals very early in the year, probably about August, September time. So it's quite strange working on Christmas things. This was always the problem with the comics. The comics went to the printers 6 weeks before publication date. So it was difficult to be totally up to date with things like a sports comic. It was difficult to be totally up to date. So we had to guess what was going to happen.
I noticed a peculiarity of some of the stories in the annuals, particularly versus the weeklies, was that there wasn't often not any credits of the creators for the annual story. And just what you said about trying out new people made me wonder: is that potentially so that you're not tipping your hat as to what those creators are because you are trying them out and you don't want them to be poached?
Well, the story of credits is something that 2000 AD brought in. In Tiger, Roy the Rovers, we had no credits whatsoever. And in most of the comics earlier on, there were no credits. When I first joined IPC, one of the rules with scripts was that you cut off the name of the writer before you sent it to the artist. The policy was the artist must never know who wrote it in case that writer gets poached to DC Thompson's, for example. So that was my very important first job, cutting the authors' names off the script.
Wait, so, go back a step. So you didn't want the artist to know the writer's name in case the writer had been poached by the competition, because the artist may also jump ship?
Well, the artist might also be doing occasional work for another publishing house.
Oh, okay.
And then he might say, there's a very good writer here, and it gets stolen.
Okay.
That was the policy that was told to me when I first joined as a sub-editor.
And you wanted to put, and like 2000 AD, you wanted to put credits on published books because it was important that the contributors got their name out there. They got their due.
Yes, the 2000 AD editorial team was very keen on having credits. I wish there had been credits because it'd make it much easier to research stuff. If people ask me who wrote a particular episode, it'd be nice to have the credit there to make it easy to solve the problem.
Barrie, you mentioned that the weeklies were printed 6 weeks in advance. Where did IPC actually print its books? And did you go there? And if so, what was it like?
Yes, Tiger, Roy the Rovers were printed in Carlisle, so it couldn't be farther away from London. So it was a long train trip to go there, and we only went there if we were bringing out a special issue, a free gift issue, or a new issue, or a #1 issue. Otherwise, there were people from other departments whose job it was to go to printers. Us editorial types had to stay behind closed doors.
I've got one of the mini comics here, and it does actually say, because it credits not only the publisher but also the printer, and it was printed in England by Alabaster, Passmore and Sons Limited in Maidstone in Kent. And just to give a sense of, if these mini comics were included in Battle, Tiger and Eagle, we're probably looking at about 300,000 minimum were printed. So that's a massive print run for those.
It's very good for the toy company, isn't it?
Barrie, just to put a pin in that idea, you went to the printer for a special issue or a first issue because you were doing another layer of quality control checking, like seeing the,
it was a tradition that the editor always went to something like that.
Okay, it's like a celebration.
I was only there really as an observer.
Okay.
But also IPC as a giant company also had some really tight relationships with the printing elements, because I think from memory, there was quite a tussle around 2000 AD on terms of the quality of print that could be used, because the IPC owned some of the printing assets and they wanted to make sure that they were being used. So there was this bit of a dynamic between, what was locked into as kind of a cheaper asset to use versus maybe what some of the editorial staff might want to use for creating a book that looks, maybe a little bit prettier. As an example, what was the launch, the book that was launched with Strontium Dog, Starblazer. Yeah, so like Starblazer, when that was launched, they were able to access higher quality paper and printing and stuff like that. As an example of a comic going in a slightly different direction with its printing.
Yes, it's nice if a comic could be printed offset, where we could use lots of color, lots of photographs. Letterpress was quite basic, and it was always nice when we were told that the comics were changing from letterpress to offset printing, because it made a tremendous difference to us on Tiger and Roy the Rovers that we could bring in photographs of sports stars and print them very large and get good reproduction.
And for an archivist
us
like
editorial never had any say in when the switches happened. We just did our work and printed it on whatever paper we were told to put it on.
I was going to say, for like an archivist like Brian, who's sort of restoring some of this art, he's got to deal with the consequences of the paper used back 40 years ago, because it's not necessarily completely archival stock, really. I think it's fair to say.
One of the two of the biggest challenges is that you get, because of the nature of the paper, it's very grainy. You get ink rub, so your solid blacks are no longer solid anymore because ink is literally rubbed off. But also at the time of printing, the ink would still be a bit wet when it was folded. So what you get on some pages is that the print from the page opposite is printed onto the other page. So all of that had to be cleaned up in the restoration work.
It's amazing what you do. It looks absolutely brilliant.
Well, it's a labor of love. That's the only way I can describe it.
Yeah, and because it was like that newsprint, you could there was even a craze, sort of, I guess, late 80s, mid 80s, for this thing called silly putty, which was this kind of putty like substance you could roll up and you could bounce on the ground. And one of the things it could do is you could put it against like newspaper print, and then it would take a putty copy of that print onto the piece of silly putty itself. So I certainly remember doing that with my Battle Action Force comics, of taking a copy from the comic onto the putty. One more question just about the stories themselves. One of the, I guess, the innovations that James that you had in your writing was that you wrote for me, two of my favorite stories, and sort of big epics. You wrote, let me put it back on stage. The story where Cobra attacks London. What's it called? London in Peril. It's called City in Peril on the cover there, which was throwing me. London in Peril, which sort of made a big imprint on my young brain. So I've got two of the original art boards by John Cooper, which are these 2 pages here. This giant thing, which is on a very solid board, and it's really stood up to time. And beautiful. I also got a commission from John Cooper, which is the thing that's over this corner, over the shoulder here, which was a painting inspired by London in Peril, with the Action Force team up against some Cobras and the Robo Skull and the Big Ben in the background. As a boy growing up in London, seeing Cobra overtaking my hometown made a big imprint on me. And then the other big story that sort of really made a big impact was Operation Deep Cover, which was this epic that ran through the pages of the final few issues, and sort of really took on this worldwide scope of Action Force and Cobra battling all across the world, and the leading to the eventual defeat of Cobra, which then sort of coincided with the end of Action Force at Battle Action Force. James, can you, I guess, touch on some of those epics that you wrote, the experience of putting those together?
They're probably my most memorable stories that I wrote, I think, because both long-running stories and both very enjoyable to write. Certainly the London in Peril one, with all the London landmarks in the background, House of Parliament, HMS Belfast, and this sort of thing. All these battles taking place around and that sort of thing. It was a very, very good story to write. I think it was, sort of an epic, really, I guess.
And it includes both the new and the old Action Force in it, because you have SAS Force make an appearance in it as well. So is that something that you deliberately dipped back into the older version of Action Force to keep those characters alive?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it's quite a long time ago to remember that, but yeah, I think so. Yeah, so different angles, different aspects of the story to introduce. Yeah, make it a bit more interesting for the readers, perhaps. Yeah.
And how long do you think you had as notice that you were losing the Action Force license and were going to have to wrap up that grand story of Action Force in the pages of Battle?
It was fairly quickly. I think it was quite a quick decision, and we couldn't bring in a replacement for it straight away. I had to wait a few weeks while we thought out this new Storm Force, which I think was quite good. I think that could have had a toy range quite happily.
Yeah, I did wonder, did you ever have any serious discussions about actually adapting the Storm Force comic into a toy?
No, we waited for offers, but we didn't get any.
Can I ask a quick question of Mark and Brian? As readers, how did you feel that Action Force ended, went away, moved, how did you feel about this new concept, Stormforce, and how did you feel that it only lasted, I think, a little while? What was the reader experience?
Do you want to go first, Mark?
Yeah, I can go. Yeah, I sort of, yeah, it was, it wasn't like trailed at all. And there wasn't like a comic news, comic press that you're kind of tapped into. So there was this, big storyline, Operation Deep Cover, that had been running for a number of months by that point. And the final issue of Action Force in Battle didn't even have Action Force on the front cover. It was a Charlie's War front cover. And it was like, you got to the end of the story, the two Action Force stories both wrapped up, Cobra Commander defeated and going a bit nuts and killing all of his men and stuff. And probably my jaw was probably on the floor for about a month. I would have thought. It's like, what? That's the end? What? And then I did have the subscription through the newsagent, so I did keep on getting it. And Stormforce, I was a big Action Force fan, so I was very shocked. But Stormforce launched, and I thought it was very well put together. It was an exciting team, the same art team that we knew and loved from Action Force. So it was like Vanyo and John Cooper doing the stories for that, and Vanyo particularly, just such a huge fan of his arts, so dynamic, exciting, and some of the the themes was similar, that you had this sort of action adventure team with their own specializations, and this set of adversaries, not a million miles away from some of the concepts of Cobra, that it was a sort of spider inspired set of bad guys, and that was a very cool set of baddies as well that was sort of had been developed by the team. So I was quite saddened about the loss of Action Force, but I gave the new Stormforce a team, and I think I continued my subscription through to the end of Battle Stormforce and into the relaunch in the pages of Eagle. So I did stick with it for a good little while after the end of Action Force.
Good man.
Yes, well done.
I don't have any kind of very clear memories of kind of Action Force or wrapping up when I was younger, but certainly before Stormforce made its debut in the comic, I would have migrated it over to 2000 AD, and that offered me a very different perspective in terms of what I could expect from comics. Prior to, I'd read Eagle, the new Eagle. I'd read Battle and Battle Action Force, and then when I moved over to 2000 AD, that blew my mind. Reading strips like Judge Dredd, Strontium Dog. I'd never experienced anything like that, as a comics reader. So I got introduced to a whole new universe of characters and what comics could be. So I kind of went off in that direction then for a few years.
And what age were you then?
So I would have been, in 86, I would have been 14, maybe, like 14 and a half, when Action Force wrapped up. So I would have been maybe 14, 15, kind of diving into 2000 AD. So that was, I suppose it was a natural progression, because those stories were a bit more mature than stuff, previous stuff I'd read. So it was, stories like Nemesis the Warlock, which deals with, it's got themes of kind of racism, where the bad guys are basically like the Ku Klux Klan in the very, very far future. That was a really, it opened my mind to what comics could be. And it was a very exciting time.
Yeah, Brian, much older than me, so different place in our lives at the time. I guess I must have been doing the maths. I must have been about 8 back in 1986. So I was probably not quite ready for 2000 AD. But yeah, did find it a little bit later on in life. I guess for Barrie and for James, sort of looking at some interviews and stuff you've done in the past. Well, for the comic, it was quite a big shock losing at the Action Force license, because it was, very well rated and a big part of why kids were buying it. It sounded like you quite embraced the creative freedom that developing a new strip like Stormforce could give you?
Yes, it was very exciting producing something like that from scratch and doing it quickly. And I was happy what we produced, and we had a very good artist drawing it. He created some really fine, memorable characters, and it should have lasted longer. I mean, a year wasn't really enough.
Yeah.
For sure.
Just going back to when Action Force wrapped up in battle, you mentioned, Barrie, that it happened very suddenly. Did you have a chance to bid to keep the license in the comic? Because obviously Action Force had changed ownership from Palitoy to Hasbro earlier that year. So was there a bid opportunity, or was it just a decision made by Hasbro, we're going to use a different publisher?
I don't know how it came about. I suspect it was the latter, but again, editorial was editorial, and there are other people in IPC negotiating such things, and I wasn't part of it.
Yeah, this book, Blazing Battle Action by David Bishop with David McDonald, gives really good insights actually to some of the dynamics of that time. And I think when the Action Force license originally went to IPC in 1982, the Marvel IPC dynamic was quite different. That Marvel UK was like still really in its infancy and mostly just doing reprints and not very much in the way of original content. And the titles it was selling were in the low thousands, let's say, compared to IPC in the hundreds of thousands. So IPC was definitely the big hitter there. But then, a few years later, Marvel had sort of established itself as more of a creative force in the comics space, and had a lot of success with its Transformers UK Weekly as well. So it was a bit more of a tried and tested presence, and also working with Hasbro on one of its other biggest other licenses, but now by that point. So I think the 86 versus 82, 83, quite a lot had changed in terms of who owns that license, it being Hasbro rather than Palitoy, and also Marvel UK now being in quite a different place in terms of a creative UK presence. Cool. I think I got to the end of most of my questions, and conscious that we don't want to tire out Barrie and James too much with all of our barrage of questions. But it was great to have you on and sort of get some of your memories of creating these comics and working on these titles. Did you have any, Tim, Brian? Did you have any final questions?
Well, I could be going all night, guys, with questions. Really, what we need here, I need to come over, sit down with you guys in a pub, get a few pints on the table, and just be really selfish and get into all my kind of nerdy questions, which you probably won't be able to answer any of them. But maybe sometime. Hopefully, our paths will cross. We get to meet in person, maybe at a convention or some point in the near future. But because I would very much love that, and to kind of reminisce about the old days. But
you can buy the drinks.
Oh yeah, I'll be firing drinks at you. The more information you're giving me, the more drinks we'll pile in there.
Sure. Sounds good.
I'm out of questions, Mark, and I was happy for this episode to be a little less co-pilot and a little bit more passenger.
Great stuff.
So thank you so much to both Barrie and James for your time, and wish you all the best with what comes next, and hopefully we can maybe bump into one another at a convention or something some point in the future.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much.
It's been good talking to you.
Yeah, great. Thank you
so much. Thank you.
Cheers.
Now back to G.I. Joe.
Amazing.
Very good. Very good, Brian.
Yeah,
So
I was not reading this stuff as it came out, but one of the fun things about writing a book or co-hosting a podcast is getting to be able to not quite witness history, but reflect on history with historical people, and this was another good get, Mark.
Yes, Mark. Well done. Well done.
In the Talking Joe library, the Talking Joe Historical Library.
But I definitely want to revisit the Action Force content in a book format, like basically a volume 3 of this book. I want to do Total Action Force volume 3, and there's definitely some gems in that interview there that would feed into the comics chapter. Just to say, that Blazing Battle Action book that you have there by Dave Bishop and Dave MacDonald is the exact same content that's in this book.
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry.
It's the exact same content. So
sorry, Brian. I would have.
Well, what I said to David at the time, when David did this, I said, look, you have ownership over your script. So,
Okay.
So he said, and he did ask me, he said, well, look, is it okay if I, republish it in a battle specific book? So I think there is some content by Dave Bishop that's unique to that Blazing Battle Action.
Yeah.
But the main thrust of it is the content from here, the comics chapter. But so I was happy for David to do it. But because battle comics fans wouldn't buy this, and it was a really important story to get it out there.
Brian, how much can we promote that book you're holding? Because aren't they all sold out?
They're totally sold out. So
hardcover and softcover and volume 2?
They're all gone. They're totally of nothing left. They're all sold out. But I, since doing those books, I'm working closely with Bob Breakin on his book. So much more information has come to life. I am sitting on a ton of never before seen Action Force imagery from Palatoy. Most of it is all kind of pre-production, so never produced. So I really want to do a volume 3. And the only thing holding me back is that I need to track down Andy Lowe, if he's even still alive. He was the marketing manager at Palatoy, and his story is the only story that nobody has. Nobody's ever seen Andy Lowe since he went to America in the 1980s, disappeared. So we're trying to find him, and if we find Andy Lowe, if he is alive, and we find him, get his information, and then Action Force Volume 3 is on the table, and it's going to happen.
I will order.
That's an exclusive right there, guys. That's fucking.
Sorry, I'm still struck by this sort of high stakes feeling of it, that you have to track this person down who's hard to find. I find that exciting and intimidating. If there's a volume 3, I will order it for myself and a couple for my store, and I look forward to it sitting on my shelf.
If you're going to put this bit out, then Mark, let's do a call out. If anybody knows Andy Lowe, former marketing manager at Palatoy, he was the brand manager for Action Force, and he specifically would have taken up from Mike Taylor. So Mike Taylor was the brand manager for the very first, Series 1 Action Force, which is a straight up just shrink Action Man down to 3 3/4 inches. But Andy Lowe is the guy who basically was responsible for developing the team's concept and maybe modeling a little bit what Hasbro were doing with G.I. Joe over in America. So his story is a really important story to be told. So if anybody out there knows if Andy Lowe, has a contact for him, and if he is still with us, get in touch with the show, get his details over here, and because I really, really, really want to talk to him.
That last name is L-O-W?
E.
L-O-W-E. Okay.
Like Rob Lowe.
Okay. Andy Lowe, L-O-W-E.
Perfect. So yeah, I don't know if we've got too much more to say to each other, but Brian, have you got anything to promote? You've sold your Action Force books, so people can't buy those from you. Wait, you've sold some of your Action Force books. What is so by some of? I mean let's move that.
Right, here we go. Yes.
This is sold out in both hardcover and softcover.
I've got an extra one for sale at my store.
Oh,
This
yeah.
One available from Tim.
Might be two. Because I got
Volume 2.
Volume 2
sold
is
out.
Out.
Total Retaliation.
That's long sold out.
Sold out.
Sold out.
Let's see.
My Palatoy Story.
So My Palatoy Story by Bob Breakin. We do have a few, 40 copies left. In the store. 40. About 40 copies.
40. Yeah.
Okay.
So, My Palatoy, for people who aren't familiar, this is Bob Breakin's story of his time working at Palatoy. So he would have been chief designer. Bob, not only does he talk about his time there and the brands that he worked on, he gives a full history of the company from its very early inception in 1919 right up to the 1990s. And you get to see how the toy industry evolved and developed and changed over the course of the 20th century. And it's a fascinating insight. And of course, if you love all the toys that we grew up with, Star Wars, Action Force, Action Man, and on the girl side of it, you've got Tiny Tears, Tressie, Pippa. It's all covered in My Palatoy Story, and there's loads of images. So it's a great book to get your hands on if you are a fan of toys from the 1970s and 80s.
Brian, are you
40 copies left?
Brian, are you working on a Star Wars book?
Well, I am indeed. So, launching at the end of this month, February 28th, myself and Paddy are going to be launching a brand new Kickstarter for Total Star Wars Toys, the Palatoy Saga. That's our working title on that book. And it's essentially going to be an extension of the work done with Bob Breakin on My Palatoy Story, Whereas My Palatoy Story covers lots of different brands, the Palatoy Saga is going to focus in only on the Star Wars toys. So we've interviewed, obviously, Bob. We've interviewed Jeff Macy, who would have been the brand manager for Star Wars for the UK and all of Europe. Roger Morrison, tooling manager, John Holmes, manufacturing manager, Carol Dayton, head of Monroe Dayton PR, who would have handled the marketing account for Palatoy, well, for a lot of their brands, but they did a lot of work on Star Wars. Nick Farmer, who's a former Palatoy employee, who, as is kind of under his own business, was subcontracted in to do a lot of toy fair and retail displays for Palatoy of Star Wars products. And he got to work with Monroe Dayton PR on creating the replica Darth Vader costumes and Stormtrooper costumes that were rolled out at PR events across the UK. But the best bit of it is that Bob and his late friend Brian Turner passed all of their photographs over to me to scan and to create a Palatoy image archive. And all of those photos are going to feed into this book. So we're going to have stuff never seen before from toy fairs, from retail, in-store events, behind the scenes, and even behind the scenes at Palatoy, as well as behind the scenes at a toy fair and in retail events. And one of my personal favorites is a collection of photographs that Bob took when he visited the Kenner offices in 1977, November 77. He headed over with Roger Morrison. They actually had to hit 3 locations. So they went to the Fun Dimensions workshop, where they were looking at the die-cast Star Wars vehicles being produced. They then went up to the Kenner model shop and they saw the first test shots of the X-Wing and TIE Fighter. And then they had another final trip to New York before going back to Leicester. And that road trip was documented in photographic form by Bob, and we have those photos, and they're all going to be going into the book.
Wow.
So it's that's coming to Kickstarter February 28th, and that's our kind of mock-up front cover right there. So it is only like a mock-up at this stage, so it is subject to change. But what you've got on the cover is the old Palatoy factory in the background, and then the AT-AT is in the foreground is my vintage AT-AT over here, which I photographed in the back garden, and essentially tried to replicate a photograph that was done by the late Neville Chadwick.
When did you say that was coming to Kickstarter, do you think?
We're going to launch on February 28th. But if you go over to the Total Toy Books website and just check in our news section, you'll see a blog post which will link you directly to the holder page on Kickstarter, where you can follow along on the campaign. Or if you just want to register on our mailing list, once that campaign goes live on February 28th, we're going to send out an email to everyone on our mailing list to let them know that it is live, and ask people to get over to Kickstarter and get their pledges in early. Because we have an early bird offer. So if you can get in early within the first 72 hours, you can get the book at I think it's around, it'll be under £40 to get it shipped. So it'll be something like £30 plus shipping for the early birds. And then after those first 72 hours, the pledge to get a book is going to increase after that.
And your Battle Action Force Treasury editions are available still. What's the best route for getting a hold of those?
Well, I'm so excited because these were only officially released in January. So we had a big kind of pre-order build up there, in the latter part of last year. And we got a great reception from that. And now they've kind of hit the retail. So they are in comic book stores. And I know, Tim, they're in your store as well. But if comic book stores, if that's not your thing, if you want to go online, if you're on our side of the pond over here, then TotalToyBooks.com is the best place to order to get the best deal on shipping. Mm-hmm. But if you're over in North America, Skeletron.com, who are handling our North American fulfillment, you're obviously going to get a much better deal on shipping buying from the Skeletron website. But go to your local comic book stores, ask the comic book stores if they have them. If they don't already have them in stock, they can get them in stock, because our books are being carried by the main wholesalers in the industry too. So it is possible to get them from the brick and mortar stores too. And I do know that certainly Forbidden Planet in the UK, I mean, they had their books in stock, and I know that two comic book stores in Dublin that I buy from, they both had them in stock as well, and they all would have ordered through Diamond. So
if you are in Greater Boston, Hub Comics in Somerville, Massachusetts has 2 sets right now. Tim said in the middle of February 2025. They don't have 3 sets because one of them I bought.
Mine.
I would say to people, get down to Hub Comics. If you're in Boston, get down there, and Donald, pick up the full suite of the Treasury editions. But also, you're going to want to have the companion piece to go with that, which is Total Action Force. So if Tim has got one of those in stock too, nab that, because it gives you the full comics history that goes, that tells the story behind those Treasury editions. This is the perfect add-on for those comic books.
It's like the bonus DVD, isn't it? It's with the director's commentary.
Except that it is not free.
No, definitely not.
The Total Battle Action toy coffee table book is not free, and it is, sorry folks, no longer cover price.
That's
the last one available. So it's we don't print the price on our covers, so it can be any price you want, Tim.
There's an orange sticker on the back cover with my handwriting with a number on it written in Sharpie. That's the current price, based on the rarity of that book. Bring it back to the main topic of today's episode, folks. Besides Brian Hickey's wonderful toy photography and toy history research, the Battle Action Force restoration of these comics from the 80s is really stunning. Scanning and fixing color and printing errors and cleaning up things very, very carefully and thoughtfully, and then packaging it in this gorgeously designed book. If you are someone who just likes any old comics, this is the book for you. If you are a G.I. Joe fan looking to expand your G.I. Joe entertainment and knowledge, this is the book for you. If you're British, this is the book for you. And if you like action stories and don't mind if they're not brand new, this is the story. This is the book set for you. Some pages in color, much in black and white, big and heavy, and no dust jackets, so you can just immediately start reading. There's nothing in your way, and some nice gold foil stamping on the cover, and numbers on the spine, so it looks good on your shelf. And
yeah, making a combined image of the three together as well for your bookshelf. Here we go.
It's really difficult to lift.
I left volume 3 in the other room before logging on to this episode.
Whoa.
Yeah, you didn't. So Tim, you're a busy guy with lots of comics to read. So I don't know how far you've got through the 3 volumes yet, but based on your initial exploration, did you have any particular sort of thoughts, reactions to reading this new, different version of G.I. Joe?
I'm struck by how fast the stories move in terms of action, but also in terms of pacing, where because these are 3 and 4 and 6 page stories, sort of the amount of information that happens within one panel or between 2 panels, it is accelerated. And also, as we have covered here, lots of gunplay and good guys and bad guys getting shot and taken down. Not distastefully, but it is war, and so a high action quotient.
Yes. And I said, I do love that Jim.
Jim Watson, is it?
Watson. I was going to say Watkins, but Jim Watson. Yes, Jim Watson cover. It's and funnily enough, Ron Turner was the artist on that particular strip, Death Castle. But you don't ever see, or you would rarely see, Ron's work on the front cover. Jim Watson made a lot more kind of appearances on the front cover, and that's a super piece, and a great. That's one of James's stories. I'd love the Death Castle story, and I'm sorry I didn't think to ask it of James at the time, but he seems to have a penchant for kind of horror themes in his stories, and Death Castle and Codename Kraken both kind of sit very much in that horror genre for me. And he did a great job on them. He nailed them.
Absolutely. And the big question, which I always ask you, Brian, is based on where we are now, success of volumes 1 through 3, everything else on your plate, how likely is it that we're going to see volume 4 anytime soon? Well,
I'd love to be able to kind of put a hard date on the table. I can't do that, unfortunately. But what I can say is April. That we've got our books are just out, and our focus is to shift these books. So this is our first kind of mass retail release. Whereas, the Total Action Force books, I mean, they were really niche. They were small print runs. So this is a much more ambitious project, for us. And obviously we've got the backing of both, Rebellion and Skeletron as well in that. So it's a big push right now to kind of, particularly not just with our own direct to consumer sales through the websites, but also through the retailers as well. And I think, let's see where things are at maybe a little bit later in the year, like maybe around the summertime. And, we might be in a better place to kind of know how we're going to proceed for kind of future volumes. I mean, at the end of the day, it is going to rely on people backing these first 3 volumes. To see, any future volumes are going to be contingent on us kind of selling through the stock that we've got.
Brian, you and Patty Lennon appeared at a table. You were exhibitors at a big G.I. Joe convention in the summer of 2024 to promote these 3 books with sort of a preview copy. Actually, you were at 2 conventions in the States in 2024, and with very cool bookmarks as little giveables.
Yes.
Are you making any appearances anywhere in 2025 to promote these books?
Oh, definitely, yes. Now, we haven't firmed up on our convention schedule, but there's definitely going to be some appearances. One that I can confirm is that is Enniskillen Comic Con. So that happens here in Ireland. So I'm definitely going to be at that. And that will be the 50th anniversary of Battle. Well, 2025 is the 50th anniversary of Battle. So, I don't know if they're going to do anything specific to commemorate the event, but it seems like a really good theme that could be covered in 2025. So Enniskillen Comic Fest is one that I'm definitely going to be at. Looking at a few on the UK side at the moment, for later in the year, so from the summer onwards. And then, of course, Skeletron, who are already in the kind of the US convention circuit right now. They'll be at Zolocon, I think, on March 1st and 2nd. They're going to be carrying the Battle Action Force books on their stand as well as they go around the UK or so the US convention circuit. So I'm hopeful that I will definitely make an appearance, in the US at some point, throughout the year. But definitely Ireland and the UK, they're firmly on the agenda for me. But the US dates aren't locked in yet. But I do have my eyes on Joe Fest. So I just want to hold off for another few weeks before I, pull the trigger on that.
I think Midwest Toys in the States, they recently had a big launch of the Skeletron retail brand. I guess they branded up their store, and they've got the Skeletron products for sale over there off of the shelves. I think that might mean that your books are available there.
Actually, because I did see some video footage from that event on social media, and I did see the Battle Action Force books there. And because the Skeletron team have the Battle Action Force books in their warehouse, they're probably a safer bet to get your books from them than from Diamond at the moment.
Excellent stuff. And Enniskillen sounds exciting as well. It could end up being a place where you can get multiple signatures on a hardcover Action Force book potentially.
Can I ask you guys? Can you just say that word again slowly? Because that's a word. That's a location that I've not heard.
Midwestern.
Enniskillen.
Enniskillen. Okay.
It's an Irish name.
Cool. Okay.
Well, if you think Enniskillen is hard, it took me ages to learn how to pronounce Oconomowoc.
Oconomowoc?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that also in Ireland?
No, that's in America.
Oh, okay. Right.
Enniskillen.
There we go. Enniskillen.
Can you say Enniskillen? Okay. Dora the Explorer mode off. Excellent. So I think we are done talking about Battle Action Force for today, but I'm sure it won't be too long before we find an excuse to talk about it again. So until then, that's it for us. Brian can be found at Total Toy Books here, there, and everywhere. Search in Google Total Toy Books. It will be the top link. And as he says, those Treasury editions still very much available if you've not yet tracked them down. Tim, where can people find you when you are not talking to me about 40-plus-year-old comics from the UK that you never got a chance to experience in your youth?
Video essays on TV and film at my YouTube channel, at Atomic Abe. My brick and mortar comic book store is just outside of Boston, Hub Comics, and I write about G.I. Joe at my blog, arealamericanbook.com.
Very good. So I think that just leaves us to say, Tim and Brian, that
Nobody Beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Oh, there's no way I'm going to be able to hit that note.
Laters.
Full force, blood for the Baron.
See you next time. Bye.
See you guys.